probably have already seen the website bios for Abby and Kia, but let me just remind you that they're both Windham-Campbell Award winners, Kia in 2014, Abby in 2016, if I have the years right. And Kia's plays include the remarkable Force Continuum, her play Breath Boom, and A Cool Dip in the Barren Saharan Creek. She's also written for The Wire show. And she, a few years ago, turned to writing fiction and has thus far published 2 novels, The Castle Cross, The Magnet Carter in 2016, which won that year's Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, and most recently Moon and the Mars. And Abby, if I'm not mistaken, has just turned to writing fiction. You'll correct me.
Yes.
But has already been writing in multiple genres. Her plays include Lally and the Scud. I just want to get the awards correctly. Fintan O'Toole named that play the Play of the Year in the Irish Times, and Pump Girl, which won the Susan Smith Blackburn Prize in 2007. She's been commissioned or been attached to the National Theatre in England, the Royal Court, and the Lyric Theatre Belfast. And she has written for radio and film, as has Kia, so working in multiple genres is already a familiar sensation for both of them. But we're here to talk about writing in fiction, something that has its own distinguished legacy. Chekhov, Beckett, Zora Neale Hurston all have written in both genres and others. But perhaps we can start with just the most basic question about that process. Why the move to fiction for you when you made that move? What, Kia, perhaps you could start. What prompted that change?
Well, you can hear me, right? Both of my novels are long-ass novels. And the first one is long. I actually brought the second one as a little show and tell. This is Moon and the Mars, which is pretty thick, and the first one was longer. So that's actually was that once I decided on the story, it literally was just too big for a play in terms of, a 2 or even 3 hour evening. It just wouldn't fit. And so that's actually how, and it was going through the characters' entire lives. And so yeah, that's why I did it.
And then got excited by keeping on doing it.
Yeah. Actually, I really there might be novelists in the audience, but yeah, I really loved the process. I loved. And Abby and I talked about this a bit. I mean, with theater's very collaborative process, and if you get the right cast, the right directors, the right designers, blah blah blah, it can be riveting. And if just one of those people is not quite the right person, it can throw everything off. And there's something really kind of wonderful about it's just the relationship between you and the reader. I really like the being inside the heads, and yeah, all of that I really like about descriptions even, which you really don't do with theater because you just want to get the right actors. You may say basic things, which are maybe race, gender, age, and these days a lot of those are more fluid, and you may not even do that, but you can be very specific with things like that in a novel.
I want to come back to the question of collaboration versus the solitariness of writing fiction, because it is obviously a key factor in the experience. But Abby, perhaps talk about your own shift.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed writing because I'm very antisocial. I mean, all writers are. And then, unfortunately, with theatre, Brian Friel has this wonderful saying, when the battle is over, the war begins. And it's when you finish writing the play, then you have to go battle the director, the actors, everything. Then just when you think, all right, we're ready to go, oh my God, critics, you forget completely about them until the opening night. And it's just, it can give you a heart attack. It's so stressful because I mean, you said if one person is wrong, I've had shows where 6 out of a cast of 12 were wrong. And you just go, oh, I'll be in the bar. Because there's nothing, and you've spent so long on this piece, and I just want to try that for a while. Just not have that stress of having to keep on battling against that. And also the plays, because of the climate, it's 2 or 3 people now, 2 or 3 people in play, and that just bores me. It just bores me. It bores me to watch it. You know, when you're standing there and you're watching, it's a one-man show, and he comes on and you hate him, and you go, it's him, and that's it for the next 2 hours. You know that feeling? You go, I can't stand this guy. You just. So with a book, you can have it's in scope. It's much bigger. Because I had written a 35-hander, you see. It was for the National, for the Olivier, but they balked on it because it was a bit controversial, a bit naughty. And I know it's the best thing I've ever written. I know it is, and it was even. They did this lovely thing in The Guardian where they picked plays, and they wanted to show scenes from plays that weren't going to get produced. They said because of COVID, but it wasn't because of COVID, it's because of the National. We're like, so they did a lovely piece of it, and they were so complimentary, and I just didn't want to let it die. I didn't want to leave the characters, and so that's what I'm doing. I'm turning that into a novel, basically.
So this is perhaps off topic, but why was it controversial in the eyes of the National?
You know, they said, can we put it on in the Cottesloe, which is the smaller stage, because somebody gets their throat cut and it's a bit much. And I said, you're literally doing the Scottish play right now. It was just, sometimes you give them a play and they don't know what to do with it. And that's almost a sign that you've got it right, because they just didn't know what to do with it. So it was 5 years in the writing. I even went there. It was in Australia, and I went to a penal colony. I can't waste all that,
Yeah, you're making me think of another person who has worked in both genres, Tennessee Williams, who writes, has experimented with the same plot, the same characters in 2 different forms, Glass Menagerie famously, and tries to, supply things or take out things as he moved between them. Both of you have talked about scale already, and obviously that is a key aspect of moving between or among genres. Playwriting is so much the art of what you leave out, learning how to leave out. And there are, as you both said, so many more freedoms in fiction to put in and talk about all the things that would be shown on a stage. How have you each handled, changing the kind of muscles you use, imaginative muscles, as you do things differently in fiction? Kia, maybe you can start, since you've talked about, the pleasures of writing to scale.
Yeah, I don't know what a happy experience was. I actually find it, in some ways I felt there were much more similarities than differences. So I was visiting a friend of mine who lives in northern England, and very close to the Bronte house. At that point, this was several years ago, and I was working on the first novel, and I had never read the Brontes because I was like, oh, they're just romances, blah, 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 boring, blah, blah, blah. But then after I went to the Bronte house, then I had to read, right? So I read Wuthering Heights and then Jane Eyre, and I like Wuthering Heights. I love Jane Eyre. And I actually, because I was working on the novel, while I read that, there was something really interesting, a lesson I took directly from there, which had to do with a part where she's she's forced to go to this party that she doesn't want to go to, and they're with all these wealthy people, and they're all being really nasty, and they won't even talk to her, but in the room they're talking about all the nasty things they did to their governesses. And the whole time I was reading it, you just keep hearing them, and Jane is in the corner, but she doesn't come, Charlotte Bronte does not come back to Jane this whole time. And all you're thinking is, what is, Jane thinking? And the only time you find out, as you're getting angry and angrier, is she runs out the hall at one point, and she runs into, what's his name? And he says, why are you crying? And that's the first time we actually had that. And it made me aware that just as in a play, you have that certain subtlety, it's the same with the novel, which is that with a play, you write so much, and then let the audience come, you go this far and the audience has to come this far. And I realized it's the same thing with the novel, that you give them just enough information that they can then bring it on themselves, take it on themselves, yeah.
Beautiful, yeah. What about you, Abby?
I used to get told a lot when I deliver a play to my editor. She'd say, "Oh, I love your stage directions," and I'd be like, "Yeah, what about the bit that goes on the stage?" So that's a lovely compliment, but is the rest of it okay too? So I think it came from that, and the scale as well of just being able to explore writing more, because very often in theatre you do kill a lot of your babies, but I'm not saying they'll still live, but it's suddenly for me a voice has developed really quickly, which I don't really understand, but it's fine, and it's fun. I'm having so much fun, because there was a time when I stopped having fun writing. I just did, and it happens, and it is the business. It's really hard. Constantly, you begin to realize that you're spending part of your life trying to think about what they want next, and you were okay in the beginning because somebody decided they wanted you. Whereas this way, I like the idea of going back into that and just going, I don't care, I'm just going to write it. There's nobody waiting on it. There's nothing happening. I had to get back. And the Windham-Campbell Prize was a great help in that. I had to get back to a point where I was enjoying my writing, because I hated it at some points.
I second that about the hating and about the Windham-Campbell Prize helping, all that. So yeah.
Did you also feel that pressure of the public wanting a particular kind of thing from you as a writer? And just giving you more
the
freedom?
public. Well, also. Before the public, theaters.
Yeah, theaters. The public are fine. Public are lovely. They're lovely.
Yeah.
Theaters.
Yeah. And so it became about the business, and it's funny. I was also talking about this, that because I came up through theater. Sometimes I go to residencies. I like to go to artist residencies, and I'll speak to novelists that are there, or nonfiction writers, prose writers, and they will speak in a code that, like, they're not realizing it, but like, I don't know what they're talking about. They'll make certain terms, and we don't realize it. So for example, in theater, if you say something like, "Oh, it felt like a second night performance," what's that mean? It's the first night has the excitement, and the second night it sort of goes down, and everybody in theater knows what that means, but you don't realize you're talking in code. And so in some ways, one of the nice things about moving to novels sort of later in life is that I was at a residency about a year ago, and I realized I've already written a novel, I've written a second novel, I may never understand that code. And then I thought, maybe it's okay, because what made me feel less happy about theater was the business. So maybe it's okay if I can write a novel and I may never quite understand the business, and that might be fine. So.
Yeah. Hearing both of you is, I would always wonder about missing the collaborative relationships that one forms in rehearsal halls and at theaters. And for both of you, it seems like you're done with that.
Yeah, I'm done with it.
I want to be alone.
I'm done with it. I'm done with sometimes just you know, feeling like you're being interrogated about a play that you took a long time to write. You see, you've got to remember it's Ireland as well, so everybody's a writer, they just haven't bothered yet. Do you know what I mean? So they're like, oh, I'm back to better than that. No, I honestly, you know, collaboration with good people is the best thing in the world. Collaboration with arseholes is awful. It's just awful.
Yeah.
It will kill you.
Yeah, I recently did a couple of workshops, and especially with the pandemic, and even before, it's been a long time that I've been in a rehearsal room, and I had some great actors with great questions, and I was like, oh yeah, I actually like this with good people, but I'd forgotten it because it become such a
I usually find if you're in a rehearsal room and somebody, usually the director starts to use the word collaboration, that's when you have to worry. Because it's a given that that's what you're doing. If they have to remind you, or you're here to collaborate, I go, oh my God, I need to be sick. Because then you're in trouble. Because they will hide behind that word. They don't understand the meaning of collaboration. They think it means I can do whatever I want and you can't say anything.
yes.
And that is law.
So I'm curious just about ways of working, sort of routines actually with working, and if those have changed now that you're both working in different forms. You know, did you have a time you started work every day and a number of hours you asked yourself to work those days, and you know, way you arranged your environment when you were writing plays, and that changed in order to suit the new forms that you're working in?
I'm not sure that it's different for me. I mean, I always have. I mean, we and Andre were talking about liking to go to residencies because you have like all that time to focus. But for me, it's always, well, I often do lots of research, especially with the novels. With the plays too, I would do research. So there's like that period. And then I sort of start slowly, and then it becomes sort of a snowball effect the more. So I may do just a little bit, you know, at the beginning, you know, a couple of hours or something, and then as it gets more, then something I want to be doing it all day, you know, morning to night or something, as I get more obsessed about it. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing about having been a playwright for so long, it does teach you how to start. You know that everything may be different, but you will start something. You know, you know that there is a process to that. Whether it's you will start to map things out in your head and an idea and play with things and oh that's interesting, oh that's not, I don't like that, and throw that away, and you just feel like one of those. I don't know. You've drawn in the air a lot. I very deliberately don't have a routine or anything like that, and I write in bed. So.
Me too.
I love writing in bed, yeah. I have a table thing that I can lie flat because I hurt my back writing in bed. So I lie flat, and my dog thinks I'm ill. But I'm working. She's going. So yeah, no, it's great, and this flips up so I can write like that. I actually have a friend who's a writer. You love him. He built a writing bed.
I do love him.
He's hilarious. And he does woodwork on the spare time just because it's another part of the brain. But he has this big bed, and there's a picture of him in the paper. I'll show you it, in this big writing bed that he's built for himself, which is brilliant. It's just brilliant. Just brilliant.
So Kia, you mentioned all the research you did for your fiction, and especially your second novel is deeply immersed in 19th century New York history. And Abby, your plays engage with history in their own way, and also how the landscape kind of holds history in Ireland. And I wonder, even though you're both, you know, you're each very distinct from one another as writers, if you can talk a bit how history has continued to inform your fiction writing, and how it may be a different engagement with that than it is in your drama.
You go first this time.
Okay, I'll give you a break. I think there is a major sort of reinvestigation happening at the moment. It's of Northern Ireland and the Troubles, and there's a lot of Northern Ireland lit, you know, those awful lists of things that you should be reading, and I find it very interesting because I've written my first short story ever, and even you just have such a rich scene there, like you just go, that happened. There was a thing called a control zone where you weren't allowed to park a car on its own because the army would come and blow it up because they thought there was a bomb in it. So, because even now when I see a car, I go to the other side of the road. And if I see like a handbag, I'm like, I'm not sitting near that handbag. But there was a designated person. One person had to stay in the car, and it was 7-year-old me. And because my brother would have taken the handbrake off and rolled it into a wall. So because I wasn't an idiot who would have taken the handbrake off and rolled it into a wall, I got to stay in that car for hours and hours while they went off having ice cream and shopping. And it's just, it's your whole, your place in the family and your role as the good girl. It just that investigates for me so much. And the fact that I was supposed to be the one that was supposed to stop the IRA or whoever coming across, and you know, like now when they talk about dogs, and you're not allowed to have a dog in the car, and certainly not children in the car, dogs in the car, and that was what was done. That was what we did. We lived in that satire, and it's hilarious. I mean, it's awful. By God, it's hilarious as well. So there's so much of that, like bomb damage sales, language that nobody else knows about. Things that my mum has said, no, I don't like bomb damage sales because everything smells of smoke. Because she was a snob, and it's just wonderful. And there is a lot of it, and I think, yeah, it's nice to investigate it with a more healthy mind, I think. I do have a friend who hates it. She says, we're going over the corpse of Northern Ireland. She got into a big fight on the internet over it. I think that's just because she's a Protestant. And she can't, now you see, she can't do the victim thing. So, because they were fine. And I would say that to her, and she'd probably agree with me. Yeah. It's funny.
That was such a great answer. I've forgotten the question.
Your ways of engaging with history in your work.
Oh, yeah. Well, most, but not all of my plays are contemporary. Most of them are. Whereas both of my novels, well, the first one was 20th century. It starts in World War II and actually does get to the 21st century. And this one is all about the relationship between Black people and Irish people in New York, the 5 Points district, rolling into the Civil War. So that was, yeah, I mean, with that, I focus on 7 years from 1857 to 1863. So it became a matter of going into that history of the U.S., New York, and somewhat in Ireland, and seeing what was interesting, what would affect these characters, and setting up each year, because it goes in order, and how that history leads up to a huge explosive event that happens in 1863. And the main character is a girl who's half Black and half Irish, which happened a lot in 5 Points. So it's also at first seen it from a child's eyes, who sort of has this innocence and sort of grows into knowledge. And then the other thing besides that was probably the most intimidating thing was the dialogue. I write it all in first person, so essentially the entire book is dialogue. And I wanted to, but the other characters also are definitely all part of it, and so I wanted to capture, there's an important character who escaped slavery, so I wanted to capture that vernacular. 19th century Irish vernacular, and her Irish family were famine refugees. and then there's her black family, and just in general 19th century vernacular. I mean, it wasn't as scary as it was at first because, you know, you read Mark Twain, you know, it feels very contemporary, but I wanted to get it as best as I could, right? Because I felt it helped a lot to catapult the reader into that time as personal as it could be. So from this first person's perspective.
It's very, yeah, that sorry.
No.
I had to do, mine was 1845, the play was 1845, and I had to learn that language. I felt like I was learning a brand new language, and I did languages at school, and that's what it felt like going back. And we need to remember that the only records we have are written, which are much more florid and very different and poetic, and it was just that idea of capturing it down into its essence and then completely forgetting about it. So that you've created your own language. It's so bizarre that you come with, that's my version of it.
Yeah.
May not be right, but I like it.
Yeah.
And there's so many interesting things, like even slang words in New York come from Irish. Like slum comes from islame, which means it's terrible.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Can you dig it? Comes from and dig into, which means do you understand? There's so many slang words that have come from the Irish language. I know, it's mine. I know, I'm trying to think of any more, but I can't.
You're reminding me actually of that wonderful stage direction in Brandon Jacobs Jenkins' play, An Octoroon, where he says, nobody knows what a slave sounded like. So this is
exactly.
You know, these
Yes.
voices are the ones I've come up with. And you're talking about voice, anticipated a question I had about the theatricality of fiction, of your fiction. And I've just started your first novel, but it's not only the voices there that are so interesting, but you know, the first scene of sign language gesture. Is so
In my first
important.
novel, there's 4 characters and 4 protagonists, one of whom is deaf.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean that, you know, that theater essential gesture, movement of bodies is woven into your prose as well.
Yeah. I'd actually ran, after my first novel was released, I ran into a friend at the theater. He's a director, and you'll think this is a very directory thing. It's actually touching, but a very directory thing to do. My first novel is 800 pages. He had read it out loud in his like kitchen or something, the entire book, because he liked to hear it, you know, being a director. He was like 20 pages shy of the end when we happened to run into him. But he said something interesting. He said that he could feel that it was written by a playwright, and I thought he meant the dialogue, which a lot of people do say that you know, when playwrights do write a novel, that's obviously the thing that we definitely have the skill with. But he said no, actually. He said yes, but actually what he was talking about was, as a playwright, you know, it's Aristotelian. We want that rising action and climax, which is not necessarily what other novelists do, but as a playwright, that is something that, yeah.
We do. We want that. We'll still have that active protagonist because it's drummed into us. I don't know if that's ever going to leave me. I don't know enough about writing novels, which is such a joy. I don't know what's going to happen.
Say more about the not knowing as a good place to be as a writer.
That's where I'm finding the joy of it, that I haven't a clue what I'm doing. And I'm discovering this very, very, very satirical voice that has come from somewhere. And I'm just running with it. And I'm just very happy not to know this should be happening now and this should be happening now. And oh no, you're not doing that there and you're not doing that there. And they won't like that. Oh, they won't like that either. Oh, never get that. That's unstageable. You know what I mean? All those things that those people that come into the room with you, they just aren't there. Because it's just, all I have to find is somebody who put it in a book and hopefully publish it, you know? It's
You're mentioning or telling the story about being in the car as a young girl. Reminded me that in both of your
plays, series of plays, you both are interested in vulnerable characters or marginalized characters or people that aren't fitting into one or don't occupy the center or fitting into a norm of one kind or another. And you mentioned having one of the characters being the deaf protagonist in your first book. Has that interest in sort of vulnerability, children, continued throughout your writing as you explore that kind of character?
Well, actually, in that novel, only the first, it goes through their whole lives for only the first third, their children, in the first novel. But I don't know that I'm conscious of that because I think when I do write children, insofar as they're concerned, they have power and they have, autonomy. I do, I grew up in a small town, working class Black, and so I think I'm not really drawn to writing about the privileged. It's just, and I'm sort of laughing, but except actually, I think one time I wrote. It actually had to do with landmines, a play of how to do landmines. And then I wrote, it was sort of the bourgeois Blacks, but it had to do with because people who had these jobs and what I was saying, about that. But for the most part, I don't think I've written about people that have a whole lot. But all who feel they have a whole, that don't feel like they're lacking, but.
Yeah, this one is an all-male penitentiary, so no would be the answer to that. And even writing it as a play, you're going, they'll never put it on because it's all male. I actually started writing it before Me Too and everything happened and everything turned around, and I was happily writing my play, which became unworkable and unperformable the more it went on. I mean, you know what I mean? It's just, it doesn't fulfill that box where it's an all-female play or representation, and yet I'm a female playwright and all that kind of stuff, and it's just, oh my God, the rules. So yeah, but you might have more chance with a book, but yeah, that's interesting, writing a load of men. That's fun.
I also always start out with some sort of issue of social justice, and so I haven't dealt with the issue of I have 3 houses, but the market's gone bad, so now I only can have 2. So it's just that's not the social justice issue I've gone after.
No.
Your first book, you write from a first-person male voice.
You know what? Yes, it switches.
Yeah.
Well, actually, all 4 protagonists, it's 2 sets of brothers. So whereas this book is mainly female characters, that book was mainly male characters. 2 white and 2 Black brothers, and sometimes they're first person and sometimes it's third person. I definitely made at least part of a big section with BJ, the deaf character, as an adult. I deliberately wanted it in first person, that too, because I wanted to be inside of his head. And I actually, when I wrote that book, I had a person, a deaf woman who we've become very good friends since then, who read it. And I actually felt very happy because there was only one moment when she said that I had gotten it wrong. She was so generous. She said, you know the part where you say they put the key in the lock and he heard it? I'm not sure if that's what I said. Thank you for catching that. but that's the only part I messed up with that. But so funny because she was like being so generous. Well, maybe you were trying to do something. I was like, no, I just got it wrong. So thank you.
Great.
I'm curious about, you talked about language, and I'm curious, and the director who read out loud, I'm curious when you have to read, if you have to read out loud for a book reading or maybe in process, what that feels like for you. Because usually the voices are inhabited by someone else. So what does it feel like to read your own words and read your characters out loud, either for book readings or in process?
That's actually a great question, and you are going to find out when your book is published. No, actually, it's a good thing that actually, as a theater person, you're a very good reader.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Yes, I had to. Now, for this book, I had to figure out an Irish accent because when I was reading, I read a little bit from the Irish family and a little bit from the Black family, and I didn't want to mix it up. But I will say, I just have to say this a little thing in terms of syntax. Mm-hmm. When I was writing the book, because of course you're not writing an accent, you're writing language to help trigger something so that the reader hears an accent. So there was one little syntactical thing that helped a lot in terms of doing Irish. It's in Ireland, because of Irish language coming into English. Mm-hmm. After can be a helping verb. So instead of saying, I went to the store, you can say, I'm after going to the store. Or instead of saying, I just went to the store, I'm only after going to the store. So yeah, so it sort of, it helped in terms of the writing itself. And then I always read the same sections, so I really rehearsed it. And then I actually Zoomed with a friend in Ireland, and she gave me 3 syllabic corrections, like, and most of it I got right.
Right.
And like AUL, it's like I'll for old, yes, and things. So
Depending on
yeah.
where you are, even in Ireland, because it could be L.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I heard that different. Because actually, Kaylee for a dance, right? I'd written Kaylee, but then she said it was more like Killy. But then someone else told me, no, it's dialect. It could go either way, depending.
This is
So
the problem with Ireland. We have so many different dialects. Like, I speak Irish, but if there's a part of the country where I go to, and I don't understand what they're saying because our dialects are completely different.
Yeah.
Like, we would say, in my dialect, which is more Donegal, it's Kajima Ratatu, is hello. Whereas I go down to Connemara and they go, Kehe Wiltu. What? What? What are you saying? What? And then we would to say I didn't would be, or I wasn't would be Harome. In like Munster they would say Ni Rev Me. Just completely different languages.
Kerry was so hard to
Oh
understand.
my God, don't even know.
I was in County Kerry for a while, and oh my God, it's like, yeah, and then and it depended on who was speaking.
Yeah.
I was there during March, so I went to the most adorable little St. Patrick's Day parade. It was only like 10 minutes long.
Oh, I love the wee Judy ones. They're brilliant. They're
It was
brilliant.
so cute. And the sheep, you know the markings for the sheep, they had it orange and green for the parade. But then they had an MC that said the whole thing. It was only 10 minutes, right? But he said this whole play-by-play of the whole parade.
I love it.
But after it was over, I realized I understood every word he said. So it all depends, and I think it depends on school and all that kind of stuff, how much I understand.
We always knew the kids who had a dose of knits. You know when you get cooties knits.
Is that a cook? Is that
Cooties,
a candy?
knits?
Oh,
No.
cooties,
Yeah,
cooties,
cooties.
yes.
Yeah, we always knew the kids because what they would do, the knit nurse would come around before it, and they would shave their heads, and then they'd paint their heads green for St. Patrick's Day. It was brilliant. You just see all these little cootie heads.
When I first got there, it was a residency, and the man, very sweet man who was the caretaker, but I kept asking him his name, and I didn't know what he was saying, so finally asked him to write it down, and it was like, M-I-C-H-E-A or R-R-L. L. Michael! It was like, I had no idea that's what he was saying. It was like, I think it's like Mihail.
Yeah, Michal, yeah.
Never thought we'd be talking about head lice.
It's such a great picture. That's my childhood. Yeah. Oh, the cootie nurse has been the knit nurse, little green heads. You're not. You know you're posh when you don't have a bald green head.
I'm going to ask a question about power. When you're starting a rehearsal, usually somebody has a vision. If it's not yours, it could be the director's or it could be an actor's or whatnot. How do you prepare when you're going into your first rehearsal? to be both an authority and a generous authority?
You prepare with boxing gloves,
Mm.
right? It's like,
I get little dolls. I make little dolls with pins. I learned a strategy over the years to get to know the assistant director really well. And if somebody has a question that you would absolutely not want to hear, just go, that's very interesting. Will you write that down and I'll have a think about it later? And then it goes. That's what you do. It just stops all the problems. Because sometimes they'll ask the most ridiculous question and you can't, or why, when they start asking why is a joke funny? Well, it isn't now. That kind of thing. So always the assistant director was my friend, or the dramaturg, and I'd go, will you write that down so I can have a wee think about it? And they would go, yeah, and then here's your question. Thanks very much. Done.
I don't think it occurred to me, the assistant director, because I think the times when I connected with the assistant director, I was also good with the director. So I
Okay.
think, but I have done the dramaturg before. They've
Yeah.
actually.
I mean,
gone
they're
through
your
that
friend.
phase.
They're nice people.
Yeah.
They're really lovely.
Yeah.
You can hide behind them a little bit. But it's when you have a director that doesn't protect you, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
It just hangs you out to dry. And that happens, you know?
Did you find you had problems with your editor? Like when you did your first novel, presumably you were edited with a literary editor.
Yeah.
Was it back and forth, or was it?
No. You know what? Actually, she loved my novel as soon as she read it, and so, I mean, what ultimately was 800 pages published, so it was like whatever, 16 or whatever it was, you know. And over 100 chapters, she actually, her very first set of notes were on 3 chapters, and the rest were like a comma here and there. It was like, and one of them I was going to do anyway. One of them I had switched, I had been doing first person, I switched to third. And then I thought, you know what, I think that would be better back in first. And that's exactly what she said. And the second thing she said is actually is an interesting comment, because it actually also is sometimes happens with my plays that I like jump right into them. And so when you're right into the world really quickly, and so sometimes it'll take the actors a little bit to catch up, but then they get it, and the audience a little bit to catch up, but then the actors help them so they can get it. But in the novel, they just needed a little more help. And so me just jumping in that world, I needed to move a little slower to bring the audience with me, the reader with me. So, you know, as opposed to assuming they're already in that world and know all this. So, yeah.
Yeah,
So, no, we had a great, the second book was a little harder. It was a different situation. There was COVID, she had a child at home, blah, blah, blah. And it was only harder because it was, it was just like sometimes she kept having to cancel meetings because it was just, but that was because of COVID and all that. It just became a little trickier because of that. But in terms of the writing itself, it was still, for me, a great relationship. Some people really love a totally hands-on editor. And so, and I don't know if she's that way with different books. I don't know. But for me, it worked really well. So.
Can't wait. I don't have one yet. I mean, I've worked with I have many good friends who are dramaturgs, so I get them. They're nice people. They're very underrated. But I haven't had an editor as such, except with newspaper articles. And they just take all the jokes out.
We have a question here.
Hi, I had a question about your research processes. You had mentioned earlier on that one of the motivations for writing a novel instead of a play was because the story was just too grand for the constraints of a play. And I was wondering how that affects the way you go about your research and preparation for writing.
Do you want to go first?
Well, you see, I did my research for the play, so so I cheated.
Yeah.
So.
But you did you did research for the play then before you did, right?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, it was huge. I had to fly. It's set in penal Australia, in a place called Norfolk Island, which is this tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific, and it was like the Guantanamo of its day. And that's where they put all the Irish prisoners, political prisoners, when they were incorrigible. They were called the incorrigibles because they wouldn't behave. So even among the penal colony of Australia, it was an oubliette within an oubliette. It was the place where you really didn't want to end up. So I had to go there, which was extraordinary to hang out in this tiny little island with a climate like Ireland's. And I just, Robert Hughes wrote a superb book, which once I'd read that, The Fatal Shore, every piece of research that I came across, he'd already got it. He'd already got everything in, you know. So it was the Robert Hughes book that got me onto the story, because they had, this was such a terrible place that they had, and suicide is a mortal sin among the Irish, because it's a mortal sin. I mean, but they're actually okay with murder. No, it's not as bad. So what they decided was that they would draw lots. They would draw lots, and that one person would be the one to die, one person would be the one to do the killing. And because they would all get off the island, 4 people, 2 witnesses, they would all get off the island to Sydney. It was just to get out of this horrendous place.
Wow.
So that's kind of what, it's so insane. And I won't spoil the end, because there's a big, what they did to sort of circumnavigate it is just totally British and satirical. But I just thought it was an incredible thing that just struck me, you know. It's for the term of his natural life. There's a part of it, I think they've moved. I think they did it in Tasmania, but it originally started in Norfolk Island, because it was a dreadful place for people to be. It's like, yeah, I love research. Research is the best.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, with my, like I said before, it was, you know, I went through every year and found out the events that happened that year. Also, so as you said, my novel takes place in the 1857 to 1863 with an epilogue a little later, but all in the 19th century. 1926 became in the U.S. copyright law came into existence. So anything before that is the public domain. So I have like newspaper articles all through because I didn't pay for them. It's all public domain. So yeah, I could go online and see the original newspapers, which also, again, gives you an idea of the text. This is an interesting thing. In the 1800s, this would be in newspaper articles. Word on the street was blah blah blah. Like you think that sounds like a very contemporary expression, but then
a critic would point that out in your play.
Yeah.
I don't think they had the expression "word on the street."
Well, actually, it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And then sometimes you navigate those things like, this is ridiculous. You know, this really happened, but is it too distracting to someone to say? So you just sort of navigate and to make it.
Is it only me that's in love with it?
Yes, yeah. But
I had the biggest wall chart. I got all these free books on Kindle, and it was all history books, because I thought I can't write a play about history unless I know all of the world's history.
I know, me too.
I mean, that's the biggest rabbit hole in the world, you know what I mean? So I had to know what was happening since time began with history, and Irish history, and English history, and Australian history, and I had to know all of it. French history, what was happening here. I had this huge wall chart, and I left it in the National. I'm going to have to make another one.
And did you also have like online etymology? Did you have that? Because I totally had that to see what words were in existence and what words were not. I use that a lot.
Yeah, because I'm fudging it a wee bit as well. I want a wee bit funky with it too. You know, if it sounds all right to me, it does. As long as it doesn't. My agent told me this story that her mother, at the time, she found some of her writing, and on all her characters, she was trying to write, as she called, you know, posh speak, and all her characters were named after cheese. It was just, she had the Lord Camembert, and he was just, and in my head I was going, oh my God, that's what mine sounds like, and she thinks it does. So I think you just have to make that decision and go, you know, nobody knows. Nobody knows. If it's, I mean, I went through, there's one line in the play that goes, are you on drugs? Like, and even a simple line like that, you go, you should probably say, are you on laudanum? But are you on drugs is funnier. And they use the word drugs, and it's extremely modern, but I hammered in, you know what I mean? And it's also a bit of a shock, because it is very modern, but technically correct.
But then also, I think also being deliberate about it, because you want
Yes.
to get that effect. So yeah.
If it's down to a gag, laudanum's not a funny word. Banana's funny, apple's not.
There's probably time for one more question. There's one. Go ahead.
I had a question about the difference when you're writing for theater and literature, how you as playwrights have enjoyed, or not, exploring the really visual aspects that are often left to other people in the collaboration of a theater production, costume, settings. Like, have you enjoyed getting more into the specificity, of all of those things as you write literature?
Well, I will say that. Well, I was saying, I don't know if you were here earlier. I was saying that things like you could be more specific, or for me, but characters and things like that. Well, I can be bigger about it. It's like in my first novel, actually. I sort of move all over the country at different times or different characters, and that's a lot easier. You don't have to many sets. On the other hand, certain things, like I have a play with fireworks in it, and I've seen the way they visually, the best, I just put that there's fireworks and they have to figure it out. And it actually premiered in London at the Royal Court, and that was my favorite designer who figured out how to do those fireworks, because she did it in a way that, without using real fireworks, makes it very theatrical. So yes and no. I mean, I feel like it does give me space, and is a lot cheaper to make a set for a novel than to make sets for. But there are also things that sometimes my favorite theatrical moments are things that you think you can't do on a stage.
Yeah. I think I have a personal loathing of flora and fauna in novels. I just stop. It's green. I don't garden. I don't want to know the name of every plant. I just don't know. So that's not done. There's just going to be none of that and none of it. If you can describe a place by its essence, yes, but I do not want to know that the hill rose up here and then it turned to the left, because it's boring. Mm-hmm. I find it really boring.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I'll say, I mean, this is a very male-oriented comparison, but I have definitely always been much more Hemingway than Proust. Just say it, be direct, get to the point. So yes.
I keep going off on tangents. I mean, sometimes mine reads like I am about 22 and very stoned, which is so much fun for me. I mean, I wouldn't before writing, but I'll go off and I started to talk about a fly on a page, and then I went in and started talking about the fly's life, and then it came back and I started to talk about other fly, and then it referred back to the fly. It's almost like stand-up comedy. I don't know what's happening, but it's so much fun. So much fun. I don't know. The novel it will never be. But it's great fun. And I hated writing, so that's good. Oh, writing bed's great. Yeah.
We're just about out of time. I'm curious if there's fiction you're reading now that you can plug or recommend to us.
I can say some fiction that I've read recently that I really liked a lot. I'll say a particular book because it was called Barn 8, and it's by, Deb Olin Unferth is her name. Do you know this book?
I just know her.
Yes. And I'm just going to say it because it's like wonderfully quirky, and I feel like it's a book that maybe a lot of people have not read. But it has to do, the author is a vegan, which I didn't know before, but it makes sense after you read it. But it had to do with like these radical vegans, and it's like they're on this corporate farm, and they're dreaming up this plan to free the chickens. And it's just so quirky, and it keeps changing protagonist in a way that sometimes can frustrate me, but she does it really well. And Yeah, I'm just mentioning that one because it was, yes, some people may not know, yes.
I've sort of got about 25 on my Kindle that I'm going in and out of, and it's. I mean, I'm sort of loving a bit of Noam Chomsky at the moment. I'm just. I always feel the need to read a lot of non-fiction. Sometimes I think it's a throwback from looking for plays. And I'm enjoying I don't know, there's so much, I couldn't really pick one out. Oh, I mean, if I look through my Kindle, I will go, yes, ask me that later and I'll have an answer. I will. So much. And now I feel guilty.
This has just been, as usual, and as expected, amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
It's
the
great
big
fun.
questions. Thank you.